So a few weeks ago, Chris and I went down to Canton on Locust Street, I think it's Locust Street, where the Secretary of State's office is, because we had to get our new driver's license and our new plates and everything. And of course, I knew it was going to cost me an arm and a leg. That was no surprise to me. But when I got there, they said, you know you have to take a test, right? Uh-oh, I am in trouble. And so I get the test, and it's 20 multiple choice questions, and then they had another part of IDing signs. Now, I passed. I won't tell you how poorly I did on it, but I passed. And I thought the hardest part wasn't the multiple choice answers, because the answer's always there. You just have to find it. But the hard part for me was the identification of signs, partially because they print it off in black and white, and they expect you to be able to recognize a red sign. Well, that's kind of hard to recognize a stop sign if you don't have the red sign to look at, right? Well, and then I think about how all these signs are very important, that we need to know and identify the driver's signs so that we can drive on the road effectively, so that we can remain safe as we drive, and not only for our safety, but for the other people on the road. And then there are other signs that are preparation signs that warn us for the things that are coming. And so as I thought about this, I thought about the signs and how we need to pay attention to the signs. After all, a stop sign is more than a suggestion, right? I think it is. At least I hear that it is. Well, and then it got me to thinking about what are some of the signs of Advent? What are the signs that are going to show us and lead us to Christ coming? And so I think we see that in Isaiah this morning. Isaiah kind of gives us three different signs that we should look for. First, we need to look for the alert of nature. Second, we need to look for the arrival of redemption or salvation. And finally, we need to look for the approaching highway. Let's look at our scripture passage this morning, Isaiah 35, 1 through 10. Hear these words from the book that we love. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. For the glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. Do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf will unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground bubbling in springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow. And a highway will be there. It will be called the highway of holiness. The unclean will not journey on it. It will be a way for those who walk in that way. Wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there, nor any ferocious beast will get up on it. They will not be found there. Only the redeemed will walk there, and the ransomed of the Lord will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Our reading ends here. It was during the American Revolution that a loyalist spy showed up to the headquarters in Trenton. And there was a loyalist spy who wanted to report to the commander at the time, Colonel Johann Rall. He had a message for him that Washington and the Continental Army had crossed the Delaware River that morning and that they were marching on Trenton. Well, the loyalist spy they weren't so sure about, and so they would not allow him to go and see this commander. So hastily he writes his message down on a sheet of paper. And the porter comes to Commander Rahl, who is playing cards. And without looking at it, he stuffs that note right into his pocket. And about 2 hours later, when the Continental Army starts coming, the guards start futilely firing at the troops. And as a result of his not paying attention and not being alert, the Continental Army received a late Christmas present, the capture of the entire division of the Hessian Army. Our first point is that we need to look for the alert from nature. Some of you might be thinking, what are you talking about, this alert from nature? I see in the scripture passage, I see blooming. And I'm looking out here, and I do not see any blooming happening, at least in my perspective. Well, what we're looking at is something that's completely different. We're looking at things that are unexpected, and the scriptures are very descriptive about the things that we will look for. It talks about the desert and the parched lands will become glad, that they will burst forth into bloom. And then he uses words, Isaiah uses these terms like Lebanon and Carmel and Sharon. These places, if we don't know a lot about the Palestinian culture, and I had to look at this up myself, that these are very opulent, beautiful areas of high vegetation, of plants and foliage that just graces the entire area. So when he's talking about that these burst forth into bloom, we're not talking about reasonably good land. We're not talking about a few cacti that's near an oasis. We're talking a complete transformation that is happening. Nature becomes glad. So we also see the personification that the nature becomes glad. And this reminds me of one of the hymns that we're going to sing later today. Joy to the world. What does that verse say? And heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. So we need to look for nature singing. Advent is not a time for anguish. Advent is not a time for us to despair. I think right now, at least I can feel it in my bones, that I'm getting kind of deflated. That this is this time where you're just kind of draining and draining and draining, and you're almost to the point that you think, oh, I just wish that Christmas could be over so I could take a breath. Or I just wish that this time could be over. The time is dragging. We're ready to get going. But that's not what the scripture passage is calling us to do. It's calling us to delight in this time. It doesn't say to mope around. Nowhere in that scripture does it say you need to sulk. It says you need to be glad. Look at the last part of verse 2. It's talking about nature, and it says, they will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. What they are doing, they are calling us to blossom. They're calling us to look away from the busyness and the stress and to start blooming, to rejoice in what God has to say. We need to pay attention to the alert of nature. How are we spending our Advent time this morning? Are we in a downward spiral, or are we looking back to God? Where do we see creation proclaiming God's glory? There's a young boy who builds a little boat, and he goes out on a summer day, and he sets it on a string, and he sets it out on a running river.